I've been looking forward to this service because it is truly an honor to welcome my friend, Reverend Tim Warner, to B'nai Israel and to invite him to speak to us. I'm smiling under this mask. I first met Reverend Warner when he was working for then County Executive Ike Leggett in the Office of Community Partnerships as the community liaison for the African American and faith communities, and he was arranging a special program on poverty to take place at B'nai Israel. In recent months, Reverend Warner, Tim, and I have been meeting every 3 or 4 weeks over Zoom for what we say is Bible study, but ends up being deep conversation. It's kind of like the old joke of the group of comedians who used to meet and tell each other jokes, and after a while they started to just say, number 41, and everybody would laugh. Number 16, everybody would laugh, and then somebody said, number 12, nobody laughed, and he realized he told it wrong. But in any case, we mention a verse, get ready to open the book, and the hour passes before we actually read it together. Still, Tim has become a friend. He attended Gila's bat mitzvah in December, and we intend to continue nurturing and developing the relationship long after this preacher exchange we are having this weekend. Reverend Warner is senior pastor of both the Emery Grove United Methodist Church in Gaithersburg and the Mill Creek Parish United Methodist Church in Durwood. The communities are quite different. One is predominantly black, one is predominantly white. Sunday morning is still one of the most segregated times in American culture. And he preaches to both congregations each week, sometimes even delivering different sermons, which impresses me immensely. Reverend Warner is a friend of the Jewish community, having spoken at Federation, being connected to the JCRC and many of my rabbinic colleagues. I could go on heaping praise, but tonight Reverend Warner is here to preach as part of our racial justice Shabbat, and so it is an honor to welcome Reverend Warner, Reverend Tim Warner, to B'nai Israel.
Shabbat Shalom. I am deeply grateful and humbled by Rabbi Safra's invitation to come and stand before you tonight. He and I have been intentionally trying to study, as he has already mentioned, for a number of months now, and I've been impressed by his transparency and his clarity, both about who he is as a leader and who he is as a Jew. We built a relationship of trust that continues to take us deeper, and I believe will make us more productive in fulfilling whatever God's purpose is in bringing us together. I'm even more impressed that B'nai Israel has taken this step. This is huge. In the midst of the revelation of racial injustice, the likes of which this country has never before been forced to understand and own, to have a racial justice Shabbat. This is a first in my experience, and I'm happy to be here today. To see racial injustice is one thing, but to do something about the work of Tikkun Olam is quite another. And I'm proud of B'nai Israel for taking these first, and I'm sure very uncomfortable steps in that direction. Now, I grew up and was dyed in the wool of a black missionary Baptist church. Most of you are probably saying, so what? I don't even know the context, but let me just say a couple of things for the people who are under the sound of my voice tonight by way of disclaimer. First, we believe that the Bible is inexhaustible. And so we try to preach it, and I mean literally wring it out to the extent that we can every single week. We know that there's still more to share the next week, so we try and get as much out of it this week as we can. This has some challenges for the preachers, but it presents an even bigger issue for the listener. It requires, shall we say, a certain time commitment. Rabbi Safra has very politely disabused me of the notion that I need to say it all tonight so you can breathe a little easier. Secondly, we preach for transformation every time we stand up. For me, this has made me a very pokey, proddy, challenging preacher. So if I say something too directly tonight or in a way that challenges you tonight beyond what you think might be appropriate, charge it to my sense of urgency about what we are to do here and to do in the world as we are God's people together. So my plan is to introduce myself a little bit, and then limit myself to just one pokey, proddy, challenging question for you tonight. And then to do as my great-grandmother, Moselle Warner, often taught. She was an amazing listener in our congregation. She instructed me as follows. Timmy, when you're called on to say something in worship, stand up, let the Lord use you, and by all means, sit down. I'm a child of an all-Black, all-poor community. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I remember images of Rabbi Heschel and Martin Luther King walking together on television. I really am that old. I know how integral the Jewish community and others were to the civil rights movement. I was reading Rabbi Heschel while listening to Martin Luther King speeches, hearing justice-centered preaching every week while I was young. And when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I came to a church and got under the tutelage of a man by the name of Robert Johnson Smith, my pastor at the time. He was a Morehouse graduate, but he attended Morehouse with Martin Luther King. Taught us intentionally and consistently not only how the narrative of the Hebrew children in Egypt was like the African American story, but that their narrative was our narrative. My Blackness and my Christianity have always been inextricably linked, but what is more is that both parts of that single identity have necessarily been steeped in the justice demanded by the particular God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For us at least, as revealed in the Christian Godhead. Like Dr. Cornel West, probably my most favorite modern prophetic voice, who I first heard say this, I've never known myself to be anything other than a free Black man and an unashamed Christian. I would never have made it through Biblical Hebrew 1 and 2 in seminary without the help of Rabbi Daniel Parker, whose synagogue my family cleaned together for years after my father launched his own janitorial business when I was in high school. I literally used to get done basketball games on Friday night and go to clean at Temple Zion after Oneg Shabbat had finished to get ready for a wedding sometimes the next morning. It was an interesting life, but I was thankful to have learned an awful lot about Judaism during that time. I went to every bar and bat mitzvah in junior high school because I was always one of very few Blacks who were in my class, all of which had many, many, many young Jewish people. Most went to these bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs for the amazing parties, but I went because I was fascinated at this rite passage that was rooted in God, wondering why the African American community doesn't have one of those in either our religious or our cultural tradition. I've sat Shiva with families with whom we were intimately connected, as well as sitting at many a Passover Seder, thinking what a gift it is to have a mandatory discussion at the dining room table about how far God brought the Jewish family and the Jewish people, and lamenting that there is no such experience in the Black church or in African American culture. I've been blessed during the entire course of my public ministry to have done all of this ministry with Jewish friends and leaders at my side, like Rabbi Safra, among others, collaborating with me as we sought to build community together, the world as it should be. Part of the challenge for me today, in the midst of such unrest around racial justice all over this country, all over the world, in fact, when the relationship between Blacks and Jews seems strained at best, is that while Blacks are surviving in this current suffering, we are not thriving. And I can't help but feel that there are some pages from the Jewish notebook that need to be shared and digested. What's worse, one thing that is most critical for that to happen is the formation and leveraging of relationships of trust on which the future where everybody thrives can be built. According to Cornel West, that's what love looks like in public. That's justice. Relationships of trust, particularly those which cross racialized barriers, are essential to any meaningful community change. Those relationships matter most when we can work together, where the structures of structural racism can be torn down together and can be reconstructed with God's shalom, where everyone is looking out for the best interest of the other in mind. I actually believe Rabbi Heschel when I read that when one understands the spark of divine that exists within another human being, he or she cannot harbor hatred for them. And that's why we are where we are some 50 years later. Is such a problem for me. Here's what he also said in his opening address at the National Conference on Religion and Race in Chicago in January of '63, at which King was a featured speaker. And this is where this very old rubber still meets a road too long and too winding for us tonight. Seen in the light of our religious tradition, the Negro problem is God's gift to America. The test of our integrity, a magnificent spiritual opportunity. The Negro problem is a magnificent spiritual opportunity. I think God was making a point like this in tonight's Torah portion. We're right at the place where God has addressed Pharaoh, who didn't necessarily want to hear what he had to say through Moses. And God then turned to Moses to tell him some things about what was about to happen. In the incredible darkness of suffering just before the dawn of Hebrew liberation, when Hebrew children were commanded to the incredible cruelty of making bricks without straw, God came to Moses to clarify God's intent and to link that intent with God's identity. Who God is and what God does are inextricably linked. No way to get them apart. And God says as much to Moses when he announces his intent to do justice. Moses, you're about to see me do some amazing things like no one has ever seen before. I'm about to deliver my people. I will show my might to you, to your people, and to the Egyptians, but I don't want you to get hung up in the amazement of it all. See, I showed up to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, the God of power and might, but they never knew me by my proper name, the Lord. Don't miss this, Moses. I've heard the cries of my people in bondage, and I'm about to free them, to redeem them. I'm about to bring justice to them, not just because they're suffering, but because it is who I am. I work miracles to do justice because that's who I am. I created this world for justice because that's who I am. I created this world for justice because that's who I am. I'm going to change people's minds and raise up leaders and bring some other leaders down because I am the Lord all by myself, and I require justice. It isn't stated explicitly in this text, but the scriptures ask it in about 1 million other places in the Hebrew Bible in different ways. How can we be freed and redeemed by the Lord? How can we be the Lord's people and not do justice in the world? That's when I was asked to speak at Adas Israel downtown after the Pittsburgh massacre. I was happy to do it. Africans enslaved and subjugated in America have been through some horrible things. Jews, to this extent at least, are my people. Not only have they endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of hateful people for millennia, but they have survived and thrived. That's my story too. And once you've been a part of that story, standing up against injustice, it seems, is an existential reality. You just have to do it. My friend and brother, Art Wallenstein, who I call out without even talking to him tonight, then the director of corrections in this county, was the first one to call me when he got word that hateful people desecrated our little church in Boyd's in the early 2000s. He cried when he spoke these words of solidarity to me. Over the telephone, he said, "Pastor, if you need me to come down there and sit on the front steps of your church all night, I'll do it." The impact of those words still sit on me. Every time I repeat them, I have to choke tears back because it meant so much to me that somebody else was in solidarity with me around injustice, around suffering, around pain. It meant so much to me that somebody who didn't look like me thought enough of me because of what him and his people had been through that he would be willing to sit and defend a place that was sacred to me and my people. That was the early 2000s. We are in 2021. I will go to my grave without forgetting what Art Wallenstein said to me that night, and more importantly, who he was in our relationship to me. We had developed a relationship of trust around helping prisoners to become free even inside the jail, to change a stake in them, to do justice for them together. And that's the work that we had tried to do. The reason he cried was because while he was Jewish and I'm a Christian, we both understand ourselves to be the Lord's people. And we're linked through our suffering to God's freedom and to God's redemption. The Lord requires justice. And because we are the Lord's, he requires us to do justice. Not so much to talk about it, but to actually do justice. The Lord intended for Moses and all the people he freed to know that they were to be different from the Egyptians because they had experienced his freedom and his redemption. And here's the pokey, pridey, challenging question, lest I be before you too long. Just want to keep my promise to you that I would ask one. And here it is. In this crucial moment, in the history of our nation that has been normalized in racialized, historical, and cultural whiteness, where we have been living the way we've been living for over 400 years based on stolen labor done by people who did the work without compensation against their will, on stolen land, nevertheless. Are you more white than you are the free and redeemed people of the Lord? Stunning, bold kind of a question. I don't know who you are, and I don't even know how you hear this, but I want you to know that the Lord requires an answer to that question in your living every single day. Are you more white than you are the free and redeemed people of the Lord? Every human being has a hue, and hence I've never met a white person. Race is a purposeful myth that keeps some people in control of power over other people. It was invented for that reason. It is meaningless in the world unless we give it meaning. Whiteness, as I refer to it, has to do with the desire and the passive and perhaps beneficial acquiescence to the structure and culture of the maintenance of power that marginalizes other people. That's what it means to be white, in my mind. American and European Jews have the burden of resembling racialized white people, but the question I'm asking you tonight has nothing to do with what you look like. That's not what I'm talking about. It's only about the extent to which, having been freed and redeemed from the Egyptians by the Lord, you are living like an ancient Egyptian in modern America by acquiescing to whiteness in America. Is the size of your bank account does the size of your bank account concern you more than the plight of suffering people? Are you going along to get along? Are you living your life in such a way that your life does not announce the justice of the God who redeemed you? Are you living like white people? Is the question. Do you know God as El Shaddai, the one who does powerful, wonderful things for all the reasons that God really is truly amazing? Or has the Lord of justice taken priority in your life? These are big, bold questions that I'm asking, and I know that you may not have an answer for them now, but my prayer is that as you consider not just the timing of a Martin Luther King racial justice Shabbat kind of a weekend, but as you consider the living of your lives and the purpose for which the God who redeemed you created you, that you will consider how you're living your life. And I pray that you will commit to living it in such a way that your life announces that you are identified with and by the Lord. For the record, I have asked and often asked both my racialized black and white congregations the same question. It is one of my ways of being pokey and pridey because we've got so far to go. Black people have a long way to go. White people have a long way to go. Jews have a long way to go. Muslims and Sikhs and Buddhists and everybody else who doesn't believe anything, we have a long way to go to do justice in this world. We have to demonstrate to the world that we are different as God's people. It's time that we, as the Lord's people, black, white, Christian, Jew, and other, begin to live together in such a way that hate and injustice have nowhere to hide, nowhere to fester, nowhere to grow. Things are the way they are because we haven't been doing enough justice. Things are the way they are because we haven't made God's shalom normative in this world. We have not, in short, created the world as God intends for it to be. In short, I'd like for us to create a place where tikkun olam is no longer necessary. That was God's intent in creation. And the burden falls to us, not because that's just our job, but because we have received the freedom and the redemption of the Lord. And we are called by his name. So I wish you Shabbat Shalom, and I pray that we may live in the peace of the Lord so that we'll do God's justice in this world. May God bless you. Shabbat Shalom.